All right, welcome everybody to the All Aboard Ohio statewide meeting. Today is March the 14th, 2026. We're so glad you're here. Welcome again. We're very excited to have a special guest here today. So we'll get rolling right into it since I know we're getting a little bit of a late start here. Appreciate everyone's patience. So I am John Esterly. I'm the Executive Director of All Aboard Ohio. Coming to you today from Columbus. Our board members are about 50 feet away from me. We're having our annual board retreat. They're in the conference room, and I'm hiding in a broom closet to do this presentation for you folks. But everybody's on board here, pun intended, and looking forward to watching this after the fact. So apologies that a lot of the familiar faces we'd see on this aren't on today, but they're doing important work. Today we're going to be talking about inside the black box. And as we kind of talked about last month, we're going to look at what happens between the steps when somebody like MORPC or like the Rail Development Commission commissions their portion of the study, whether that be step one, step two, or step three of corridor ID, or whether that be something completely unrelated to passenger rail. Maybe we're just talking about another transportation project. So what happens between when that study is commissioned and when we get the information back? So today we are very excited to be joined by a long-term friend of ours, Elliott Lewis, who is currently a transportation planner at AECOM, but was previously with MORPC. Elliott and I got to know each other fairly well when he was working at MORPC and doing that work. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and allow Elliott to share his. Let him give a brief introduction and then kind of take it away.
All right, let's see if this works. Can everyone see this? I see one head nodding. That should be enough for me. Okay. Well, hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm not used to presenting in Zoom. So if something happens, just chat or nudge me and I'll try to figure out what's going on. But thank you, John. Thank you, All Aboard Ohio. Thank you, everyone. It's really good to spend Saturday morning with everyone here. I love working with John. I love working with Mitch and everyone at All Aboard Ohio. When I was at MORPC, John made my life a lot easier. So I'm always indebted to all of y'all's work. Um, so just a little bit about me, real quick. So as John said, I'm a transportation planner by trade, transit specifically now, but I've worked on transit, multimodal stuff, active transportation, do a lot with funding and financing of capital projects. So really just any way that you get around on the ground, that's sort of my purview in the past. Previously, did civil engineering work in water and wastewater and environmental planning as well. So I'm technically a plan engineer, but please don't have me try to design a super elevated curve or anything like that. It won't go well. I've worked for private consultants as I do now, but I previously worked for the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, MORPC, here in Columbus, where I'm based, as well as the Chicago Metropolitan Planning or Agency for Planning, CMAP. Worked in similar capacities both there, expanded in uh, here in Columbus and MORPC to do a lot more of that multimodal stuff. So I was very involved in Link Us. So if you are familiar with Central Ohio, back in November 2024, voters passed a ballot measure to increase the sales tax to dedicate about $8 billion worth of multimodal improvements through 2050. So help as part of that, helped to set up a really an active transportation transit supportive infrastructure fund and program. So basically, all the ways that you actually get from your door to the bus helped to set up that capital program in conjunction with City of Columbus, CODA, the transit agency here, Franklin County, and a ton of others. Worked with FTA on a lot of transit planning, but also I'll talk about it later here too. The Midwest Connect Corridor ID program. So that is the route from Chicago to Pittsburgh by way of Fort Wayne and Columbus. But just a little about a bit more about me. Why did I choose transit? I am from West Virginia. I went to West Virginia University, and that little thing there, if you're not familiar with it, is Morgantown Public Rapid Transit, the PR or Personal Rapid Transit, the PRT. It's a fun little gadget bond. I encourage everyone, if you are ever even close to Morgantown, go check it out. It probably won't break down on you. And then, of course, I had to share a couple of pictures of me on trains. My wife sent me a picture of me just passed out asleep on a train, and I chose not to include that here. But if you really want to see it, just email me. So just a little bit about AECOM first, and then a little bit about passenger rail planning in general. I'm sure you know a lot about that. And then I'm going to touch about on Midwest Connect. And at the end, I'll just talk about kind of the public sector experience versus the consulting experience, kind of what those intersect are and how we intersect with other stakeholders. I won't get too much into other transportation projects for on these slides, but I'll try to save plenty of time at the end for questions to go over sort of what that black box actually looks like for different things. But first, give a plug for AECOM. We are a very, one of the largest engineering, architecture firms, planning, you name it. We are, have technical expertise in just about every sector, not just transportation, but focusing on transportation. We do everything from, design, build, operation, financing, funding, grants, you name it, it's there. If you want more information on what we provide through that, there's a QR code there for specifically for the mass transit side of the house. And since you have to see my face, I'm going to make my colleagues' faces show up since they can't be here. There's just a bunch of our stars across the country working in this sector. So if you see some of these names that might be familiar with different plans or initiatives that you've been a part of in the past, hopefully they served you well. But they are wonderful people to work with, and I just like to shout out all of these folks. Work with a number of them regularly, and I can send these slides out, or John can send these slides out too. So a few of the things that we worked on at AECOM, this is actually before I got to AECOM, so I'm speaking for my friends there. If you're familiar with the Amtrak Daily Long Distance Service Study, so the LDSS was a 1.5 year long look at how can we revitalize, expand our long distance, or Amtrak's long distance network, and AECOM was the lead consultant to help that. Ironically, I, as a planner with MORPC, it was involved in regional stakeholder meetings. So went to a few different places in Minnesota and Missouri and Ohio to give them an earful. And now, I see them, I feel bad for some of the things I said, but it actually turned out to be a good a plan. Happy to talk more about that later. Kind of as part of that, but actually a standalone project is the Daily Cardinal. So if you were down in Cincinnati, Southern Ohio area, pretty sure this is near and dear to your heart. I'm from West Virginia. It's near and dear to my heart as well. Trying to upgrade that to at least daily service. And that is part of the FRA's Quarter ID program. That is one of AECOM's projects that that is about to go to step 2 planning now. Also worked on a preliminary service development plan for Amtrak Cascades. So between Vancouver and Eugene, focusing on that corridor, especially between Seattle and Portland. I'll bring this up a little bit later, but this is a really interesting thing that is kind of the forerunner to a core service development plan that the FRA introduced recently. So I'll come back to that one. Here in Ohio, we've worked with a number of cities, including Hamilton, Hilliard, Sandusky, even Cleveland, on station studies, whether feasibility, revitalization studies. While I was at MORPC, I worked with the AECOM team and the city of Hilliard on their station feasibility and siting study, which is shown in the right. Also done work in Cleveland to help position the North Coast Connector too for funding and early design. If you know Ken Sislak, we were working on the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad as well, and just about to kick off a rail congestion mitigation study with the High Rail Development Commission down in Cincinnati. It's more freight related, but will hopefully have a lot of passenger benefits as well. Just to plug it, we have other services, freight rail. We do signals, separation, grade separations. Really run the gamut of any interface that you have with the rails. We have folks that we can connect you with. So going into the corridor IDs, one's been on everyone's mind since 2023. And we are happy that we have several lines in Ohio that are part of this program. And, give you a little overview, kind of where we are right now, where we're going, and sort of what that process was from about March of 2023 to December of 2023, and then since then. So I know we have very engaged folks with All Aboard Ohio. So you probably know all of this, but this is a very common slide that the Federal Railroad Administration likes to share. It's the arrows slide, as we call them. So when we talk about corridor ID, it's really getting from big systems planning into individual projects and get them in from planning of those projects, get the conception of those through initial development. So initial capital design and environmental clearances before you get to really the heavy engineering, the final design, and the construction, which are those final arrows that come from the Fed-State Partnership, or National Railroad Partnership, whatever they are calling it these days. But we're going to focus on those development stages for the rest of these slides. Back here. And sorry, if you are putting questions in the chat right now, I can't see that right now, so I will try to come back to that at the end, or feel free to interrupt me. That's fine too. But to get back into the corridor ID program, there are 3 steps-ish. Now there's kind of like 3.5 steps, which I'll talk about. But it goes from the step 1, which just about everyone has finished so far, all 65 plus corridors, of getting that scope, how we're going to plan for all of the step 2 and step 3 that work. The schedule, when's that going to happen, and the budget. How much is it going to cost, and who's going to pay for it? So, as we move through these, trying to really narrow in on the needs along the corridor, both in terms of ridership, in terms of capital needs, operations, you name it. But recently, in the last 6 months or so, FRA has gone through, actually over the last year or so, FRA has gone through a lot of changes, we'll say. With the change in administration, there was a reshuffling of priorities and a sort of contraction of staff. That, coupled with the overwhelming popularity of the corridor ID program, when you have nearly 70 corridors in the program, all working at the same time, big bottleneck, big backlog. You have reduced capacity for reviewing. You have everyone kind of at the same spot in the process right now. Even half of those corridors really haven't had a lot of work done on them before. Have had some, but nothing incredibly extensive. So what FRA introduces this core service development plan. So I kind of call this step 2A, step 1.5, whatever you want to call it. But this is more of a feasibility study. So once you go through the scope, schedule, the budgets in step 1, FRA determine whether or not this is required for your corridor. You look at it and it's like, well, we really haven't seen a lot of a market analysis, ridership projections, realistic timetables. In order to not, really spin wheels, waste a lot of resources, and to make sure that there is enough capacity across the sponsors, across FRA, host railroads, and other stakeholders, they implemented this core SDP, which is really a feasibility study. So trying to look at things like the capacity, you need to demonstrate the market based on travel patterns, demographics, economic development trends. ridership potential. You need to align the current infrastructure with the capital and operating needs. Understand what is possible in your corridor. Have realistic cost estimates and ID potential funding sources, as well as governance structures, which is going to be key for a route like Midwest Connect, which spans four, maybe five states, and is currently led by one city and two MPOs. So really trying to answer those questions beforehand, so it makes the rest of the work a lot easier and take a smaller bite at a time, is the intent of the core SDP. So come back to the cascades. It's interesting that we were able to work with WISDOT and folks up there to do a preliminary SDP, which is kind of like this core SDP that has evolved. Really looked at initial alternatives for service and developing a preliminary purpose of need. This is going to set the foundation for their detailed service development plan, as they're going to do with step 2 of the Core ID program. They really wanted to do this to get a head start on everyone else so they can move forward before everyone else and not get caught up in delays, whether with FRA review or procuring other consultants for if they want to do other work like that. And so it kind of serves the same purpose. We want to make sure that we have some of our ducks in a row early on, so we make the harder, more complex tasks a little easier. So this looked at the forecast ridership. It looked at different alternatives, and the ridership for all those alternatives, market demand and everything that didn't require extensive modeling. Brought the stakeholders to the table early. That way, everyone has a sense of what is the shared vision for this corridor, and then focus conversations, focus collaboration down the road. So that's well and cool, but I'm sure you guys don't really care about Seattle as much as you do about Ohio, or else you wouldn't be here. So what's this mean for Ohio? And again, I want to sort of give this through the Midwest Connect lens from my past MORPC perspective. I'll pepper in a little private sector perspective in there as well. So first off, thank you all aboard Ohio for this graphic. I have stolen it multiple times. But for Midwest Connect, again, is the Chicago Pittsburgh route, 545 miles across 4 or 5 states. That or is whether or not it goes through West Virginia. It's led by the city of Fort Wayne, with the MPO in Columbus, the MPO in Pittsburgh, all working together to help deliver this from step 1 now into a core SDP and then beyond. Anticipating that core SDP to start whenever FRA says so. Hopefully mid 2026 to later. That's kind of in the same boat with 3C and D. I haven't checked in on the Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit one yet, so my apologies to Toledo friends and Cleveland friends. But really, just about everyone is done with step 1, and it's just waiting for that reduced capacity to really break through with FRA to move into the next step of the core SDP or a full step 2 detailed service development plan. So we talk about the black box. Well, there's the black box before the black box. How in the world do we get to an application for corridor ID? Well, last train ran through Columbus in 1979. Last 3C and D was 1971. You've heard it before. Columbus is the largest metro area in the country without any rail transit or intercity passenger rail. And frankly, we're tired of it. They redeveloped Union Station. We went through all the stuff in the 2000s with the stimulus funds, returning that to the federal government. And then when the 2010s and the 2020s rolled around, really trying to think of different connections that we can make, whether passenger rail, whether other modes, and that led to the Rapid Speed Transportation Initiative. That was the progenitor for the Hyperloop study. You were part of that. That just really looked at what is the market, what are potential demand between Chicago and Pittsburgh for high speed travel or intercity travel. focused on Hyperloop, but we also looked at passenger rail alternatives. That wasn't fully fleshed out at the time. We didn't have enough resources at the time, really trying to focus on the others. But all of that work, I'm going to say Hyperloop's not coming in the next 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. So um, it is what it is, but it really helped set the table for when corridor ID was announced, when the bipartisan infrastructure law was signed, that included the launch of this program. And, we hit the ground running as fast as we could to take all this stuff that we have done in the past and tailor it for this new opportunity. And so to do this opportunity, and what I like to talk with this group about is that it was really initiated by another advocacy group, our friends in Fort Wayne, Northern Indiana, the Northern Indiana Passenger Rail Association. They've been around for quite a while, and they've actually commissioned different studies to gauge the feasibility for connecting Chicago to Fort Wayne Toledo, and others, and Chicago, Fort Wayne, Lima, and Lima, Columbus, and others. And they were really instrumental to help bring us Fort Wayne. And we brought on the folks in Pittsburgh and others to really, create a coalition to get this thing together. Again, we built upon the past studies that we did, NIPRA did, Fort Wayne had done. What was really cool, and actually probably the hardest part about all of this was trying to garner support for this across such a vast corridor. Who's going to own what? Who's going to be able to reach out to who? And who's going to actually support this? Because, passenger rail across, two pretty red states at this point, especially new stuff like that, we weren't exactly sure what that appetite was going to be. But it was amazing to be able to have over 100 letters of support from people like then Senator J.D. Vance, to Representative Beatty here in town, to Illinois Department of Transportation, to West Virginia Department of Transportation, to the Columbus Blue Jackets, like you name it. There were plenty of support. Transit agencies, I know, just especially people up in Toledo, Columbus, Cleveland, our transit advocacy group here, Transit Columbus. Shout out to you. Thank you. Love you. It really, all that put together, when we sent that into FRA and we had conversation with Amtrak along the way, they would just tell us straight up, this is the broadest base support we've seen for really about any application they got. That was really a testament to a lot of the work that we did, a lot of the work that we had help with All Aboard Ohio too. And that was awesome. You want to learn more about the corridor, there's a QR code there. It actually includes the application. We had another consultant help us put that together. But there's a lot of good information about how the past kind of feeds into what we want to do for the future. But what happened since then? That's cool. December 2023, we got notification that we were accepted into this program. The completion of step one really, we procured a consultant. We worked with them throughout 2024 and into 2025 to get that scope, schedule, and budget. And really, that's working with leaning on the technical expertise of the consultant, who has been able to do this. And it's not really a shot in the dark for an MPO who has no passenger rail experience whatsoever, to understand what is the level of effort that's going to be needed to deliver this, based on past service development plans, but based on what's prescribed through the core ID by FRA. So with that, completing those required elements, but then really trying to expand public education and involvement too. So putting together a meeting in the box in case you All Aboard Ohio, or people there, if you want to go and talk to your friends, talk to an organization about Midwest Connect, there is something you can just go to the website, download. You get a presentation, you get an agenda, you get a flyer. that's simple, easy to understand, and really lets people know where we are in the process, where it's going, how people can help out. Also, convened the first passenger rail committee in the region. So that's folks from cities, transit agencies, state, all over Ohio, others in Central Ohio to keep that momentum going. This was submitted in 2023, or it was awarded in 2023. There's been work going on, but a lot of it's behind the scenes, and a lot of it, is a little slower now than we anticipated. How do we keep that momentum going? And really trying to do it in every avenue that we can through advocacy, through convening stakeholders, uh, through convening executives in the private sector. That's probably what is very different about this than it was back in 2008, 2010 era, as making a strong economic development case, making a strong safety case, as well as a strong transit case as it should be. So trying to strengthen those ties across the corridor, not just in Central Ohio, and then having the local communities like Hilliard, like Dublin, and others start to plan now for if and when they get a station. How is it going to best serve their communities? Whatever that might be, and then continue coordination with FRA on proceeding to that core SDP and beyond. That's a fair amount of waiting at this point. AECOM, we have several corridors highlighted that we are working with the sponsors, or we have some level of involvement on these corridors from Arizona to Long Island to Wisconsin to the Daily Cardinal here. And just about all of those, again, are waiting to get into step two. We have a few that are those obligations are pending. We have one that has kicked off, Amtrak to Long Island. So we're starting to see those finally break through. But we also have to pivot a little bit. When we first scoped all of these, we anticipated all of those being detailed SDPs. And now with, three of them being core SDPs and other consultants, we have about 15-20% of the corridors nationwide. Other consultants are going through the same thing. How do we go, and reallocate internal resources? How do we work with the sponsor to have a more realistic schedule and scope? FRA is revising the scope to tailor to align with core SDP requirements. But how does that work with the client team, the consultant team as well? And so we at least had time to be able to figure that out as well and chart a course forward that works for everyone. But very excited to say that soon you will definitely start to see actual plans come through and not just say it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. So a little bit of optimism there. But that said, again, it has been hurry up and wait. We are expecting that notice to proceed for step two, whether for the detailed ones this spring and this summer. There will be directed notice notice of opportunities of funding, or NOFOs, as we call them, funding opportunities. That really says, all right, well, you have funding for them. These are the corridors that are going to move forward now. Same thing with the core SDPs, but because there's 29 or 30 of them, and FRA is working to rescope all of those are going to take a little bit more time, and those are going to be a bit more varied too. So they could be, spring, summer, that could last through 2026. I don't have an exact date for the Ohio corridors of what that would be, but I would anticipate sometime this summer and fall for those. And then if you're interested in a new corridor, a new extension of a corridor or an upgrade that's not in the program currently, we are expecting the next step one NOFO to come out late this year. And so if you're thinking of a line like, I don't know, Toledo to Columbus or others, that is the time when they could get into the corridor ID program. But again, other experience we've had, that shift to the core SDPs, as much as it frustrates me, because it is kind of changing gears that we didn't anticipate. I'm optimistic that it will be a net positive, that it'll allow sponsors who have no previous experience working with FRA, working with passenger rail, to really define steps and break them down a little easier, and smooth out sort of the demand for reviews, for collaboration, for work, both for clients, sponsors, and especially FRA as they stand right now. But we are monitoring that technical and administrative capacity at FRA, as well as other industry changes. I'm sure that you've heard of proposed mergers, UP North Southern and Amtrak restructuring as well, how that might change current planning inside corridor ID and outside of it as well. So kind of finally a few thoughts before I finally shut up and let y'all ask questions and come through. Really, whether it's public sector, whether it's consulting, whether it's advocacy, whether it's just a private citizen, really all of us are working towards the same goals of introducing or enhancing passenger rail in Ohio. We all want that, whether or not it's part of a contract. When it comes to relationships, the consultants, we bring the technical experience. We have modelers, we have economists, we have planners, engineers. So, we bring that to the table to help complement the sponsors who are the key to driving that momentum to bring consensus on those goals, on the strategies, bring a regional and corridor-wide vision for these routes. And because these are, probably 200 to less than 750-mile corridors, communication is going to be crucial, involving the stakeholders, including the host railroads early on, and defining those roles, having systems of accountability and communication. And I'm going to go back to the governance too. At some point, whether it's a joint powers authority or something, there's got to be an entity for Midwest Connect to oversee the rest of this planning and hopefully operations of the corridor. So getting that answered early on will make everything else easier. But that last point is key. Like, you can't have the structures, you can't have consensus on goals unless there's effective public participation. And so we actually know what people really want. And that's why I love the intersection of what I do, what I did, what others at MORPC do, the state, and advocacy groups, because that is one place of intersection that we really do okay with, I think, but has a lot of potential to grow as well. And I see the growth of All Aboard Ohio over the last several years, and it's been amazing to see where it's going to go and how we're going to work with each other moving forward. So that's sort of my last slide. I did have that picture of me asleep on the train. I took it out at the last minute. Again, I will share that if you really, really want it. But yeah, so I will shut up, and if anyone can come through the chat, John or others, and help get some questions together or shout it out, that would
Yes.
be a lot of help.
Yes, I have a question.
All right, who has a question?
I do.
Okay, I can't see people.
I'm right here.
Okay.
Anyway, since you work for AECOM, I was hearing about the multimodal hub study. The money has not been received yet by the city.
Mhm.
The money has been awarded but not received. When does the multimodal hubs study start? Will it
That's a
start this year?
that's a good question. I'm not as familiar with that project. I think is Ken actually on right now? Because he could probably give a better
Yeah.
insight. Hey, Ken.
Hi, guys. Yes. Micah, Eli, I have answered this question in emails to you numerous times. And for the audience, I will repeat what I've told you before. The city of Cleveland received a grant of $960,000 to do the study of the multimodal transportation center. The city and the FRA, it's a build grant, or USDOT, is in negotiations now to obligate the money. The money has not yet been obligated. Once the money gets obligated, which will be later this year, then they will be able to start work on the study and be reimbursed.
That's really good.
As I have said before, they don't get a check for $960,000. This is a reimbursement grant, and which means that they have to spend their own money and then submit a bill or an invoice, if you will, an application for reimbursement, and then the money will get paid back to them. They can spend money now if they want to under letters of no prejudice, if they've negotiated that, and spend money today and get reimbursed in the future. But until the money gets obligated, they're really not allowed to draw down unless they have a letter of no prejudice. So the process is ongoing. As Elliott said earlier, that the FRA and others at the US DOT are very much under the gun to get all of this money obligated. They are working diligently to do so, but they have a lot of grants and a lot of agreements and a lot of project sponsors they have to deal with. And there is a limited number of people at FRA now. They're down to about they're down 20% or more of their original staff. So they are working diligently. So the short answer to your question, Micah, is, and has always been, when the money gets obligated later this year, that's when the study will start.
That's pretty cool.
And thank you.
Mhm.
Tell him I'm glad.
Thank you.
Tell him thank you for letting everybody know.
Thank you for letting everybody know.
Yeah.
Jessica, I see
thanks
you've
again.
got a hand raised if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, I remember the Midwest. You were talking about the Midwest Connect process, and first of all, remind me, is that like one of the corridors that they came up with in step one, and what? And then the other question is kind of, you at the end of your presentation, you were talking about the public participation. But that's kind of, so is that going to be part of step two? Because I ask, they'll tell you every month. I ask kind of where it stands kind of in terms of all aboard Ohio members' jobs, if you will, and they're still kind of it seems like we're still kind of waiting to start step two in order to.
Yeah, I that is a very pertinent question, one that, again, when I was in MORPC, got a lot. So to answer your first question, Midwest Connect is that corridor from Chicago, Fort Wayne, Lima, Columbus, Pittsburgh. That was conceived, well before step one activities. That was the basis of the application. So we had the route in mind, the general route, not the exact alignment, the general route in mind. And that's what we submitted in the application to the FRA for corridor ID to enter into the program. And once we got into the program, we worked on those step one activities, which are really, again, that scope. So figure out, all right, what all is going to be needed to do to answer all those questions that people are going to have about service, about where stations are going to be, what are the capital and operating needs for this corridor and all of that. So really it's just getting your ducks in a row for the actual planning moving forward. That's what step one is. Step two, whether it is a full service development plan, detailed service development plan, or a core service development plan, SDP, that is really when the formal structured public involvement will come into play. One of the elements of those SDPs is a public engagement plan and communications plan. So there will be multiple avenues for all corridors, for stakeholder engagement, for public engagement, and that's when that will be more detailed. So again, unfortunately, the question or the answer right now is just a little bit longer before you get that, out, which is why it's been so crucial to keep that momentum for the last, year and a half, 2 years, and to keep people from not getting jaded and burnt out when we actually get to more substantive things.
But in terms of trying to get other organizations, for example, or as we've had some discussion on All Aboard Ohio Small Businesses, supporting passenger rail. It's like that would be easier to do when there's a more formal, that's the more formal stakeholder engagement process will lend itself more to that.
Yeah, it will. I mean, it's obviously not impossible to do it now. In fact, like you can at least figure out, sort who your target organizations, audiences can be. Have a preliminary plan of engagement with them and talking points for them, and then shift need be when those things really come out and understand what the actual opportunities for engagement are. But yeah, it'll be a little bit easier and more targeted for when that plan comes out. And that doesn't come out at the end of step two, that comes out at the beginning of step two.
And then there's a kind of a public engagement process. Also, the Rail Passengers Association, I guess, is planning their convention for 2026 in Toledo. So
Yep.
that actually might work out. It's actually in the fall, I think, but maybe we'll be in more of a step two by then, and that'll actually work to.
We should, fingers crossed. I've said should a lot or the last a while, but we should have more information by then, and it will be a really good timing. Yeah, I hear that's going to be at Toledo Union Station, which will be really cool. But we'll see what those final logistics are. But yeah, I hope to attend.
Maybe there'll be something about the way to use that convention to show that support for.
Yes, definitely.
Glenn, I see you've got a hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, John. My question is, it's actually one for you and maybe one for John. Does Amtrak's, it looks like they're pushing Amtrak into privatization. Does this have any effect on your corridor development?
It remains to be seen. For a lot of this, the operator has not been identified yet. Most of these, if not all, is assumed it's going to be Amtrak, but it's not necessarily decided at this point. Whether that is determined at the beginning of this planning process, the middle, and it can shift. But yes, that restructuring will have some effect. It's right now it's not a privatization, but it does set itself up structurally to potential down the road. I can't speculate on that right now. I will let John speculate on that. But yeah, it's likely to have some effect, but we're really working with at this stage the planning side of the house with FRA, and that's really not going to change quite as much. But that it will affect once we get later into corridor ID, especially when we get into step 3, when we talk about instead of actual routes, actual projects along the route, how that's going to be delivered, and then especially during construction operation. John, or anyone else want to speak to restructuring?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'll take a bite out of that as well. So Glenn, I think there's maybe a bit of a misnomer, and I don't want to say blame, but I think credit is maybe due to our friends at the RPA for jumping in a little bit ahead of the gun on the proposed restructuring. I don't know that there's an explicit move for privatization. As I understand it, and as we've gotten a little bit more detail from FRA and from the Department of Transportation, this restructuring is really just to create more transparency in the Amtrak operations. So, the fleet would be split off into kind of its own category, and routing would be split off into its own category, and then facilities and maintenance would be the third. And really, again, I don't see any direct push for privatization. I think they just want it to be, again, more transparent so that particularly the finances of individual routes are more easily available. There's kind of a lot of it's difficult to figure out the finances of a specific route, particularly the long distance routes, which are all kind of lumped in together. So I think their goal is to really show which of these routes are successful and sustainable and which ones might not be.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes they just test balloon these things out, where they'll throw out a comment like, "Well, we might be privatizing," and just to see what the public reaction is. But my second question, and this is more to you, John, uh, who's actually doing the study for the Cleveland to Toledo to Detroit corridor?
I believe it's HDR. Am I?
It's HDR.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's HDR, correct.
Yeah.
HDR? Okay.
But having said that, they're only contracted to do step one.
Yes.
Step two will have to be a separate contract and has to be re-advertised. So it'll be open to the entire consulting community. And I can tell you that there are some consultants who will remain nameless that are very interested in that.
Okay.
Yeah, so for most of these corridors, each of those steps, the sponsors don't have to recompete to move on to the other steps. They don't have to reapply and compete against other corridors to get in there. It's like the mafia. Once you're in, you're in. You're in the program, but each step has a separate grant agreement, and just about all of these are structured to where there's one contract for technical services for each of these steps. So yes.
Well, then as a follow-up, when will it be determined who does corridor 2 for our area?
When FRA determines that that corridor moves on to step 2. So once the sponsor, which in this case is ORDC and MDOT, once they have the blessing, if you will, from FRA to move on, that's when they will issue a request for proposals, or request for qualifications for those services. And those are the things that the private consultants will respond to, submit their proposals. And so, that can take, several months just to get, someone on board for that as well before starting the planning.
Yes.
Okay. Thank
I
you.
have a question about restructuring. Is the restructuring plan a plan to privatize Amtrak, or is it not?
Again,
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I was going to say again, we have not heard any explicit plans to privatize Amtrak. And I would also say to some extent, Amtrak is already privatized. It's a bit of a pseudo public-private partnership. Although they are appropriated from the federal government, they do operate to some extent as a private entity.
Really?
So, you'd mentioned in the chat other private rail companies like Brightline. I think the quiet part that people don't really say out loud is Brightline is heavily, heavily subsidized by federal and state funding.
Hear that?
To the point where they're probably funded, to the same level that Amtrak is, if not more, on a kind of per route basis. So I don't think, I don't want to speak necessarily for anything or take a particular position, but I think the fear of Amtrak being privatized might not necessarily be rightfully positioned.
The only thing, John and Elliott, I would like to add to that, only to the extent that we have heard from the FRA explicitly, this is not a plan to privatize Amtrak. They have explicitly stated that in meetings. This is not a plan to privatize Amtrak. Having said that, however, when you go into the Corridor ID program, they have also said that if Amtrak believes that every one of these corridors is going to be operated by Amtrak, they're sadly mistaken, because they're expecting the Association of Independent Passenger Rail Operators to submit bids and to go after some of these other corridors. Because there's a whole industry out there of passenger rail operators that are under contract to provide services on these commuter railroads that are very much interested in the Corridor ID program and have expressed interest at Washington through their lobbyists, through Congress, to the FRA, that they are interested in these corridors. So I expect sometime in the future, when you get down to actually figuring out who's going to operate these corridors, you're going to find there's going to be some competition for some of the more interesting corridors, like maybe Chicago to Pittsburgh or something like that.
When I was in MORPC, we actually met with folks from the organization that Ken was talking about, met with other private operators, reach out to them, they reach out to us as well. So trying to build those relationships and keep them open as we go through this process. If you follow anything MORPC does, there have been several trips and meetings and calls with Brightline, just exploratory, just to really set a relationship, if nothing else, as they go through there. So again, like some of these assume Amtrak, but Ken's right. There will be a push for competition in that space.
I appreciate that context, Ken. Thank you.